dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Well, welcome back. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am, of course, Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. You know, we have a tendency to view current events as though they're taking place in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events occur. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions unpacking the broader historic context in which most events take place, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village and in which we live. There's been a development from the Supreme Court that I want to mention, and there's another interesting aside, and we'll get to all that on the other side.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Hey, thank you all for your tolerance. I'm a little bit out of sync since I am traveling, so thank you for your patience and your tolerance. As I said, there's a development from the Supreme Court that I wanted to mention, and there's another interesting aside. The U.S. Supreme Court handed President Donald Trump what many are claiming a major victory earlier today by curbing the power of federal judges to impose nationwide rulings impeding his policies, but they left the major question about birthright citizenship unresolved. The justices in a 6-3 vote along ideological lines said that in most cases, judges can only grant relief to the individuals or groups who brought a particular lawsuit and may not extend those decisions to protect other individuals without going through the process of converting a lawsuit into a class action suit, a special type of litigation that requires challengers to clear many larger procedural hurdles. The Supreme Court did not rule on the underlying constitutionality of Donald Trump's executive order. The 3 liberal justices in dissent said the president's directive is clearly illegal. Quote, the court's decision to permit the executive to violate the Constitution with respect to anyone who has not yet sued is an existential threat to the rule of law. That was from Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. All of this while the Trump administration is ramping up its resettlement of white South Africans while simultaneously moving to bar entry for refugees from countries that fall under his travel ban. Thus far, only one group has been allowed to enter the U.S. as refugees under Trump, and those are Afrikaners, the descendants of Dutch colonizers in South Africa. Trump is claiming that these white South Africans are facing racial discrimination and, of all things, genocide. And that's an allegation that lacks any evidence at all. There was a document that was reviewed by the Washington Post that stating that the administration plans to resettle 1,000 white South Africans in the U.S. before the end of September. So, folks, in a nutshell, the Supreme Court is okay with the executive branch unilaterally attempting to amend the very clearly stated birthright citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment and creating a fictitious genocide in South Africa while facilitating a real genocide in Gaza. With all that being said, today, the issues before us are, according to a piece in Black Agenda Report, there's a tremor developing in New York City, and it's shaking the foundation of the Democratic Party establishment. A 33-year-old Democratic socialist, Zohran Mamdani, a state assembly member representing the 36th district in Queens, has defeated former Governor Andrew Cuomo and other candidates in the Democratic Party primary for mayor in New York City. Is there more to this than meets the eye? And then also, according to another piece in Black Agenda Report, a day after the Israeli settler colonial apartheid state launched a sneak attack on Iran, and Iran that thought it was involved in serious negotiation with Israel's main benefactor, the United States, the Black Alliance for Peace has declared the Middle East is on fire because Israeli and U.S. imperialism lit the match. My guest today is an editor and contributing columnist for the Black Agenda Report. He's the director of the Northside Project for Peoples-Centered Human Rights and serves on the executive committee of the U.S. Peace Council and leadership body of the U.S.-based United National Anti-War Coalition. Brother Ajamu Baraka, as always, welcome back. Let's see where we are here. We got audio on Brother Baraka. Welcome back. Can you hear me?
Glad to be back. Thank you.
There we go. There we go. There we go. So I apologize for that long introduction, but there's so much going on in the world right now. Man, where do you want to start with this?
Yeah, well, I guess we can start on this one because this is might be even though it's important, it might be the quickest to kind of just to deal with, because it is a little bit up in the air what the real meaning of all of this really is. I know that everybody is really concerned, and so we should maybe unpackage that a little bit first. But then, like you said, there's so many things happening, and so many things happening because of the deepening political crisis in this country, and how that crisis is being played out in reckless policymaking by this government, this empire, globally, and the consequences of this reckless behavior. So, I guess we can jump into that one first.
Well, let's go ahead. What are your thoughts on the what are your thoughts on the dynamics of this? More than unpacking or regurgitating what we're hearing through the mainstream, what do you see as being the dynamics of this?
The dynamics is that basically what we are seeing is a consolidation, and this might sound sort of banal or cliche-ish, but we are really seeing the consolidation of a neo-fascism in the U.S. A process that, as we have been talking about for a few years, has been an ongoing process, a developing process, is now culminating in these kinds of behaviors, policies being articulated by this particular administration, taking this trajectory of politics to their logical conclusions. And what do we mean by that? Well, we've seen a new form of, in my opinion, white supremacy developing in this country. A new form in the sense that it is sort of a renaturalization process. This country was, from the very beginning, built on the basis of a naturalized white supremacy, a notion that this is a nation that belongs to Europeans. That was reflected not only in their march across the country that became the United States of America, from sea to shining sea, the manifest destiny, if you will, which meant the complete almost extermination of the native peoples of this land, and to today, what basically they believe, or is the ideas are coming back, that this kind of manifest destiny, this kind of right to rule, and for the U.S. society to be seen basically as a society in which white makes right, then this is being reflected in policies. And this notion that non-European people, because that's the real target, who may happen to have a child in this country, if they're not citizens or whatever, then, you know, under the 14th Amendment, that child was automatically a U.S. citizen. But part of this process of othering all non-white people, the Trump administration has been championing this notion of that this right, this automatic citizenship right, needs to be eliminated. And he issued an executive order to that effect, knowing, I think, that this is going to have to go to the courts because it has constitutional implications. Okay. Now, my understanding of the Supreme Court decision today wasn't specifically just on that particular executive order, but on the power of lower courts to issue these broad injunctions against policies being produced by the Trump administration. And they're suggesting that some of these injunctions went further than the responsibility of those lower courts, and that what had to be done was a more specific look at the plaintiffs and the merits of the arguments that were being advanced by those plaintiffs. So what that means is that the cases can go forward that were blocked by the lower courts, including the challenge to this EO. Now, it doesn't mean that a president has the ability to basically overthrow, overturn, reverse, if you will, a constitutional amendment. It means that there are going to be certain aspects of that challenge that will probably find their way back on the front of the court. That's my layperson's understanding of where we are today.
A couple of things here as we connect these dots that I think are, first of all, important for people to realize about this issue, so that I think that they can get a much broader and better understanding of, again, the ramifications or the dynamics here. First of all, the 14th Amendment is very, very clear. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. That's clear. Why was the 14th Amendment added to the Constitution? Primarily to deal with the citizenship of formerly enslaved Africans. That's why they were compelled, after the 13th Amendment abolishing enslavement except when convicted of a crime, they had to have the 14th Amendment. So now you have the President of the United States challenging the very element that was fundamental to the citizenship of formerly enslaved Africans. And then, so for the court to say that for the executive to challenge what is a national act and limit a court's decision on that, in my humble opinion, is incredibly inconsistent. And then throw in the Federalist Society is the clearinghouse for the justices that decided in that incredibly lopsided 6-3 ideological decision. Your thoughts, Ajamu Baraka?
I think that your analysis is legitimate, but I will suggest that and correct in the sense that this, in fact, is the historic reality of why we have the 14th Amendment and the consequences of that. The Trump forces, and this is the political component of this, have said that this right has been abused, and primarily abused by non-white people, and that the way you correct the demographics in this country and reconfirm the whiteness of this nation, to protect this nation from the nefarious influences of other of non-European peoples and their strange cultures, is to have a corrective, and the corrective is to impose, to eliminate that automatic right, to basically call into question the legality of that aspect of the 14th Amendment. Is almost connected to, and some people are making an argument that this is a horrible decision akin to the 1857 Dred Scott decision. I think that's a little bit extreme, dramatic. But we need to be reminded that in that decision, the court said basically that, in essence, that Black people, non-Black, non-citizens, had no rights that the courts needed to recognize. Basically, that is, there was nothing in the Constitution that provided the basis for any inherent rights of enslaved people. Now, that was a terrible decision, people would say, but basically, on one level, Dr. Leon, it was relatively consistent with the objective reality of the Constitution. Now, this case, I think, is different in the sense that there's clear language in that 14th Amendment that lays out, that establishes a new right, and what the Trump administration is attempting to do is to undermine that right. That, I think, is where it's going to be the stumbling block, because the only way in which that language can be eliminated will have to be a further constitutional amendment to undermine what's already there in the Constitution. And I think that's where people may not be clear about in terms of what the implications of this might be. I know it could be very confusing and even scary with all the other things that are happening. But and I'm not suggesting some kind of extreme confidence in the U.S. authorities adhering to the Constitution, because we see now we are in a phase of complete lawlessness, and we're going to talk about that when it comes to not only things here in the U.S. but also globally. So, it's kind of, we have to give this a few more days to kind of see how this unfolds, and look at and read and analyze some of the analysis of what this might mean.
A couple more points to what you've just said, and then we can move on to the other issues. One is, there has been this ongoing battle between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And the executive branch, Donald Trump and his cronies, have been operating under what's called the unitary executive theory. That being that the executive branch has sole control over, for all intents and purposes, the operations of the government. And that is directly unconstitutional. It is inconsistent with the concept of co-equal branches of government. And what we see in this decision is the judiciary branch backing that play and using the rights of people of color as the basis of that attack. And the irony that I see here is the second piece that I opened with. Trump now wants to bring in 1,000 Afrikaners as refugees under the felonious fiction, foolish idea that those white Afrikaners are being subjected to genocide and racism in South Africa. It's the bizarro world, brother Baraka.
You're absolutely right, and that's why, this other element with the Afrikaners really kind of, I think, reveals the political character of these moves. That again, I mean, I think that you are correct in the sense that, you know, the unitary concept of presidential power and the way it's being exercised by this administration does seem to challenge the notion of checks and balances and the co-equalness of the three institutions. Um, I think though that this is not going to go that much further, because again, it's unless there's some type of corruption, complete corruption of the Supreme Court, the language is there, and the fact that that amendment is in place is going to put some degree of a block on that. But the other piece of this, the political component of it, this is how I see it, with the contrasting that, and I think the way you did it was very important. With this, while they are eliminating temporary protective status of all of these various groups, Haitians, Venezuelans, and all of this, talking about sealing off the borders, et cetera, et cetera. There's this great sympathy for Afrikaners, the colonialists in South Africa, the white colonialists in South Africa. I think is the contrast that I think reveals the true nature of the politics. That is again the renaturalization of the United States of America as a white nation and a refuge, if you will, for any white people who might find themselves or pretend to be under fire because of their quote unquote whiteness. Now, what was kind of comical about this was you might recall the first group of Afrikaners that came into the country, what, about 2 months ago, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like the Trump administration, they were kind of confused because what you saw was the reality also of the Afrikaner population, which is you have the extreme rich Afrikaners who still control, the lion's share, more than 70% of the land in South Africa. And then you have the Afrikaners who were the government workers, who were in fact workers, who are poor people, poor white folks. And they're the ones that ended up in that first group, I think, of 54 Afrikaners, looking scraggly and unwhite, if you will. And so,
Appellation, looking at tad bit
yes,
Appellation.
yes. And so people were kind of confused, like what the? So, but that is the reality. But that's what happens when you're pursuing these kinds of goofy policies, these kind of policies that have no connection to objective reality. You have this kind of goofy stuff, but it's very dangerous because it plays into this dangerous naturalized embracing of white victimhood that's connected to the belief that white people in fact should be in command, and that any place where they're not in command, then they must be victimized by certain nefarious forces.
And another irony or serendipity here is claiming that these white Afrikaners are subjected to racism and genocide while backing the genocide in the settler colonial state called Israel. And Israel's last backer was none other than South Africa, as South Africa's last backer was Israel, as we were fighting to end apartheid in South Africa. And that then goes to Kevin Baptiste's super sticker. And Kevin, thank you very much for that contribution. They want to maintain what Dr. Bobby Wright called, quote, the psychopathic racial personality, end quote, and they're redoing a good job. Ajamu.
Well, they really are, and I speak to that psychological phenomenon also, and I call it the psychopathology of white supremacy, a white supremacist ideology. It is really a cognitive disorder that that for the afflicted, it disconnects you from reality. You cannot even correctly perceive objective political, economic, and social reality. And for me, it is a very valuable weapon, because what it suggests is that these Europeans who are making critical decisions are going to invariably make the incorrect ones, decisions that are counter to themselves, and decisions that ultimately will benefit us. So, this is where we are today. Now, this appeal to whiteness is in fact powerful in this particular historical moment, because so many people are embracing this notion of white victimhood. And the reason why they see themselves as white victims is because if they're not in charge, if they're not dominant, then basically something is not correct. And so that's why they can, support, as you said, the activity that is openly genocidal. That they can support that and justify it, rationalize it as being morally acceptable. That the very fact that these Palestinians are engaged in any kind of resistance, and the fact that these Palestinians still exist and refuse to leave their land, it makes them now killable. They Because the fundamental core belief of white supremacy is that non-white people have no value. Their lives have no value. They have no rights that anybody needs to respect, and therefore you have this sadistic, savage brutality that's been normalized. Here we watch every day, Dr. Leon, uh, Israeli soldiers shooting into crowds of Palestinians, forced to line up in order to receive some temporary food relief, or they will starve. And the numbers are horrific. You've been around long enough to remember the Sharpsville
Yes.
massacre
Mm-hmm.
back in 1960, I think it was, where the world was horrified when the South African authorities murdered between 89 and 91 people. Horrified. The Israelis are massacring people at those numbers every day. And it's not even being covered anymore in the Western bourgeois press. That's the degree in which this genocide has been naturalized. And so, this situation is something that's completely unique, because genocide was seen as the highest crime. No nation or group wanted to be criticized as engaged in a genocide. Um, but now that red line has been crossed by the Israelis, and as a consequence, has made the planet a much more dangerous place. But more importantly, it has numbed people in the West, that is, to this incredible suffering. This incredible suffering. The notion that anything in South Africa that may be happening to Afrikaners, and nothing is happening to them at all, besides the fact some are being subjected to crime like other Africans in South Africa. South Africa is a very unhealthy place in many ways, and very crime ridden. So they will highlight some of those stats and suggest there's some kind of systematic program against South Africa. So that's not true. But the notion that they will suggest something similar to what's happening to Palestinians is outrageous. It's outrageous. This is the most horrific behavior that we've ever seen since the atrocities of the Second World War. And people who are supporting this, people who are silent, they are going to have a lot to account for internally, within themselves, when they can no longer deny the reality of this, and historically.
Just to put the final point on that, in a nutshell, I think people have to understand you're dealing with a group of people who are starving, who have been forced into starvation conditions. This is not due to natural catastrophe. This is not due to climate change and drought. These individuals, these Palestinians, have been forced into starvation conditions. Then they are told, if you want food assistance and aid, go to these locations. And then when they follow that directive, they're being assassinated. And the United States is complicit in the atrocity. It's a war crime. It is collective punishment, which is a war crime. Folks, this is not my opinion. I'm not making this up. I'm telling you the reality based upon international law, based upon the outcome of the Nuremberg trials, and the manner in which, or the basis upon which, this is being rationalized is that the Zionists have dehumanized the Palestinians. In the eyes of the Zionists, they do not see the Palestinians as human the same way European Americans dehumanized formerly enslaved Africans who then became, after the 14th Amendment, African Americans. Final point on that, Ajamu.
You're absolutely correct. And that's why, we have this historical fact that one of the last of the nations that provided support to South Africa apartheid was in fact Israel. There's a reason why you have this affinity between Israel and, at that time, South Africa, apartheid South Africa, and today Israel and the United States of America. All of these were settler colonial states. And at the center of their establishments and in the ways in which they maintained themselves was systematic state violence and systematic state violence against the racialized other. So these are white supremacist states that have this natural affinity for one another because they are upholding white power. And I think we've got to, as painful as it might be for some people to raise this, it has to be raised in and put in its proper context. Therefore, because if not, you won't understand it. You won't understand how can the Western world, how can the world, it's not the world, how can the Western world allow this kind of brutality every day in Gaza if it wasn't a reflection of their collective myopia, their inability to see the Palestinians as equal human beings. You can't explain it any other way. It is systematic white supremacy. And if the treatment of Palestinians can be justified and rationalized in that way, we ask Black folks in the United States, for example, what do you think that they can do to you?
And to that point, let's transition to the domestic conversation and the outcome of the mayoral Democratic primary in New York, and the defeat of Mario Cuomo and the election as the Democratic candidate, 33-year-old Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani, a state assembly member. There are a number of people who see this as a transition from the old guard to the new guard, but you, I believe, say, nay, not so fast. That there are other underlying significant issues that must be brought to the surface.
Yes, I mean, we have been here before with candidate-centered politics, where people will say, vote for me and I'll set you free. And I understand he's saying that. But we've had AOC and others that appeared to be progressive and turned out to be basically be swallowed up by the Democratic machine. Now, this may be a different situation because what we should be focusing in on is the kind of politics that have been articulated in this race. The positions that Mamdani has been advancing are very, very important ones, and they have resonated with enough individuals in New York City that now we have the situation set up where he is now the Democrat Party nominee and will face off with against the Republican and with probably with some independent challengers. So this is a very significant development, and we don't want to poo-poo its importance. And I think some people on the left need to be very careful about raising arguments that sound very similar to the same kinds of arguments that will be raised and are being raised now by the political right in terms of his social base and some of the issues he's championing, how unrealistic they may be, and et cetera, et cetera. This is an important challenge, and whether or not it results in real change within the Democratic Party, we'll see. But it's a legitimate challenge at this point. The other point that we should be making, though, as it relates to the electoral process, is that while having a progressive and even radical platform, radical in the sense of U.S. politics, is important, the engagement with the electoral process cannot continue to be what we call candidate-centered. If you're going to engage in the electoral process, there's space for that engagement, but it has to be from an organized base. It has to be part of a broader strategy for transformative politics. We can take advantage of the fact that millions of people participate in the electoral process, and therefore it is irresponsible not to contest in those spaces. Revolutionaries contest in every space we can get access to. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to win people over to transformative politics. We don't want to fall into the same trap of inadvertently, though, legitimizing processes that will continue to confuse people and make people believe that we're going to win we're going to transform society through the electoral process only. We don't think that's going to happen. If it happened, that'd be fine. But the nature of the state is such, and the character of the class that controls the state makes that possibility very, very unlikely. So these are the kind of issues I believe that we should be looking at and debating before and as this process unfolds, because we see that there's a very strong possibility that Cuomo may run as an independent. Mm-hmm. We know that Eric Adams is running as an independent. And there's going to be some very interesting racial politics, Dr. Leon, involved in this process, because you have some Black folks who still support Cuomo. You got Black folks who want to support Eric Adams. We're going to find that Mamdani is going to be quote unquote white baited in ways that like very similar to Bernie Sanders. And it could be very ugly and confusing if we don't get into this with a political struggle that helps to sharpen the issues being debated, the implications of the positions that people are articulating. We've got to reject, in my opinion, pigmentation politics. And if those kind of politics are rejected in the Black community, then we should see Mamdani beginning to make even more inroads in the Black community, and we could see the possibility of a progressive coalition, at least initially, emerging in New York City.
To your point, I think African Americans need to pay very, very close attention to how this is going to play out. I think the possibility of Cuomo running as an independent could be a very important indicator to the community about where and I don't say this as though we don't already know the question, but I don't already know the answer, but this will be, I think, a very important indicator in terms of where, if Cuomo runs as an independent, will he bring with him into that candidacy some of the Democratic Party apparatus who would much prefer to support him as a former white Democrat, now masking himself as an independent, instead of the Democratic Party keeping their resources in the party and backing their nominee, who's now not white and a self-declaimed democratic socialist. That, I think, would be a very key indicator to us as African Americans about how they feel about us. Your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting that you're framing it that way. I think that's important framing. But it's about us, but it's about the kind of politics that they want to see legitimized.
Correct.
And
that's my point.
yes, and that's why you see this jockeying. See, there's real confusion among the Democrat Party establishment. Should they fall in behind an independent thrust with Cuomo, or should they back this upstart Mamdani, or maybe even have Cuomo not run and fall behind Eric Adams, as unstable as that might be for the Democrat Party.
Right.
This is going to be very interesting. I think that in the end, they're going to pull something very similar. You remember India Walton in what was it, Buffalo, who won a few years ago, a sister, African American, who won the primary, had a good chance of becoming the mayor. And what happens? The New York establishment undermines her candidacy. He falls really, in essence, on the other side. And the money came in, and basically her candidacy was destroyed. That is the nature of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is a right-wing neoliberal party, and they are beholden to the right-wing white supremacist donors that prop up that party. But it doesn't mean that there isn't space for internal insurgencies. And I've made the argument on a number of occasions that a real effective insurgency within their party has not really happened. They've gotten close with those two Bernie Sanders runs on the national level. Well, Bernie Sanders was not prepared to go all the way. Going all the way meaning to basically break the party up in order to win the levers of that institution. And so we see the continuation of the dominance of those neoliberal forces. But that does not mean that there cannot be effective challenges on the local levels, especially if it is being driven by organized forces with real popular bases. Okay, that strategy has not really been effectively challenged or effectively pursued since 1988 with the Rainbow Coalition and Jesse Jackson. Okay, so these still some interesting times, and I would just caution left forces not to engage in some of this infantile leftism, and just automatically in this kind of leftist posturing where you just dismiss strategic opportunities or lessons that can be looked at and maybe applied in different places. That's not that kind of immature politics we can't afford right now. We can play with it before, but in these circumstances we are facing now, this kind of stuff has got to be dealt with and ruthlessly criticized. There are lessons to be learned. There's things that can be applied. If you're serious about trying to build real institutions, if you're really serious about organizing and not just posturing, okay? We have too much of that among the so-called left in the United States. People playing games, they're playing the role of leftists or revolutionaries. And luckily many of them are going to be driven out the movement because this new moment that we find ourselves in, this fascistic moment where these people are not playing, they're at war with us. Those elements that are playing games, they will be driven out. Some of them are already leaving. They're just scared, running, and whatever. But with those of us who stay, We've got to be clear, ruthlessly clear about what is to be done, what is needed. All of this other middle class, ultra democracy, and all this kind of crap that people have embraced, is time out for that, because these are serious times, and for serious people.
Sahar Dancer, thank you very much for that $9.99 super sticker. Greatly appreciate that support. Ajamu, you just mentioned the Democrat, or referred to the Democrats as a right-leaning party, which may have set a lot of people's hair on fire with you saying that. So if you could explain why you feel, or why you are describing the party in that manner. And while you're doing that, let me ask those that are viewing this to respond in the chat room about what signals, if any, do you see coming out of this Democratic primary for mayor in New York? Ajamu.
Let me make sure that I'm not mischaracterized. I didn't say right leaning. I said the Democratic Party is a right-wing party.
Okay.
It is a rightist party. Neoliberalism is a rightist phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
It is a rightist political phenomenon. Okay. And that's why I've made the argument that when, we got diverted with this Trumpism the first time around, I'm saying, look, you can't just look at this Donald Trump clownism, as dangerous as some of that stuff was, because what was happening was that basically the Democratic Party, the neoliberals who were in control of the state, they were systematically moving the state to the right. This was the configuration of the first phase of neo-fascism in the United States of America. And I made the argument, still makes the argument that these were the forces driving fascism. These are the ones that were prosecuting those of us who were opposed to the Ukrainian war as Russian agents and this and that. They're the ones that came up with the labels of misinformation and disinformation. When it came to having positions that weren't in alignment with the positions of the Biden administration. These were the ones who were in alignment with the tech companies that were systematically throwing people off of social media platforms because they didn't adhere to community standards. Those community standards meant you had to be lockstep with the Democrat Party. These were the foundation of fascistic elements in the United States of America. So, Jeffries, the Obamas, Chuck Schumer, these are rightist forces politically, objectively. These are pro-capitalist rightist forces that were, if given the opportunity to, they will impose themselves on the rest of us. That's why they try to use lawfare against their political opponent. Who's that? Donald Trump. That didn't work out too well, okay? But the very fact that they used those instruments to keep that individual and the political movement he was heading up shows you the extent that they will go to try to maintain power. So our position is you got to look at both parties. Look at a duopoly. Don't allow yourself to be manipulated into believing that there's a good master and a bad one. Okay, both of them represent two elements of the same ruling class philosophy, the same ruling class interest, and we can't be drawn into this internal bipartisan struggle among those elements of the ruling class. Okay, we've got to articulate our own particular interests, our own needs, and organize around that, and understand that whatever the differences they may have among themselves, they still find a way to unify when it comes to us, when it comes to the Palestinians. The Europeans have given complete support to the U.S. criminal attack on Iran, violating all aspects of international law. Okay, the Europeans support Israel's racist rampage in Gaza. Okay, Democrats are part of that process. So, folks, don't allow yourself to be confused. Both of these parties, in my opinion, are the enemies of humanity. They both represent, along with the U.S. state, an existential threat to global humanity. That might sound extreme, but I think it reflects the objective reality and the sentiment of people around the world who see the U.S. As a threat to all of us.
And another data point to support your point about neo-fascism, folks, remember Joe Biden's Ministry of Truth? Remember when Joe Biden was trying to put together a commission that was supposed to police social media platforms, but what they were really doing was setting up a structure so that they would be able to dictate and control the narrative that was being articulated through social media platforms. It was the Biden administration that attacked Facebook. It was the Biden administration that attacked Twitter. It was the Biden administration that attacked Instagram and tried to constrict the parameters around which freedom of speech was going to be allowed through social media. It wasn't Donald Trump that did that, and I don't say this as any type of fan of Donald Trump. That's just a fact.
Exactly. And TikTok, they're the ones that started the attack on TikTok. Yes, and we have to go back to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2011 under the Obama-Biden administration, where they put in place, it was passed, processes by which U.S. citizens can be indefinitely detained by the U.S. military. And we have to remember that it was the Obama administration that used the legal apparatus to go after and to intimidate and prosecute whistleblowers as using the Espionage Act of 1917. They use that more times than all of the previous presidents combined. Okay, it was under the Obama administration that, for the first time that we know of, 3 U.S. citizens were murdered by activity of the U.S. Government, including a 16-year-old child murdered by blown to bits, the son of a so-called terrorist, blown to bits by the Obama administration. Okay, so the foundation for aggressive, excessive state power has been set, and set under both administrations, with the Democrats actually even being more aggressive on that than anybody else. Look, there's not been an administration since 1945 more aggressive and more warlike than the Obama administration. Don't let anybody fool you. And how did it happen, Dr. Leon, that now the Republicans present themselves as the party of peace, and that even in Trump's base is being split in half because of his support for another never-ending war, and the Democrats either silent or in support of Trump's warmongering?
And it was former President Barack Obama's Attorney General Eric Holder who said on national television that an American president has the authority to assassinate an American citizen on foreign soil without judicial review.
Exactly.
Folks, that we're concerned about Donald Trump and the 14th Amendment, and we're concerned about Donald Trump and his trampling on the Constitution. He's not alone in that room. He has dancing partners in that room. Let me final point around the outcome of the mayoral primary in New York, and that is, when you look at how Mamdani utilized technology, I want to say he spent $30 million. I think Cuomo spent 90. And there was almost like a 5 or 6 to 1, or maybe even greater split on their television spend. Cuomo spent most of his money on television, Mamdani had a very effective social media campaign, reaching out to the younger demographic through the technologies that they use, bringing them into the debate. Are there, and since the show is connecting the dots, are there any dots to be connected between Mamdani's approach in 2025 and what Howard Dean did as the head of the DNC when he established the 50-state strategy and when he also started to use the internet as a fundraising tool? Are there any similarities to be, or am I trying to connect dots that are too disparate?
No, the dots are connected. Not only, and Howard Dean was really was the beginning, and that 50-state strategy was very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
But then I would then bring in the candidacy of Barack Obama in 2008. They also effectively used social media, even though they still had a lot of money also. So yeah, this is the trajectory of politics in this country. But let's make sure that we are careful with this too. You can use and be effective with that technology, but you also have to have a message that resonates.
Absolutely.
And we want to make sure that people understand that it was. I think it's important people need to at least examine what was it about Mamdani's messaging that resonated with so many people. And that's again what we bring back in the politics of this, the issues that were being raised and the solutions being offered that seem to resonate with large numbers of people. Okay, so the technology is important, but let's make sure we keep the focus on an examination of the politics. Same thing can be said.
He spoke to the working class in New York. He spoke to the middle class in New York. The city is too expensive to live in. You're being pushed out further and further and further away out of your own city based on cost. He had a number of democratic socialist-based policy and programs to support those in the direst of straits in the city. So now the question is, was that bait? Was he throwing chum in the water? Or is he actually committed and wedded, if he becomes mayor, to delivering on those campaign promises?
Let's see. And let's throw this in too. The other element about New York that's very different from most other places is they had ranked choice voting.
Yes, they do.
Okay? Dr. Leon, when we had the alternative debates when we ran in 2016, Jill Stein and myself, and Democracy Now! Set up the alternative debates where we were able to participate in real time. We had 26 million people that listened to that debate. Listen to us debate the primary candidates. Okay, but we only got 1.5 million. A lot in terms of third party politics, because people made this decision at the very last moment that they felt more comfortable going with Democrat over the possibility of a Trump winning. So the conditions were right, and the conditions were right in New York to take advantage of a progressive agenda, utilizing technology, and then the result has been what it is right now, at least temporarily. So, again, what we did in 2016, what we see, what aspects of Bernie Sanders' campaign, and what we've seen this with Mamdani, again, it demonstrates the potentiality of progressive politics and even radical politics if they're pursued effectively and soberly and strategically.
Do you have any time for one more question about what's going on in Iran?
Yes, we could do that. Yes.
Okay, because I wanted to be sure that we hit on and you wrote a piece about what's going on here, and I'm not going to ask a question. I'm going to make a statement and then just throw it to you. Okay. Folks, there was no military nuclear program in Iran. There hasn't been one since 2003. U.S. intelligence speaks to that fact. The Donald Trump Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, testified to the Senate to that fact. The IAEA has come out and supported that fact. And despite those facts, Donald Trump wants to ignore that reality. Lil Marco Rubio wants to ignore that reality and just say, oh, ignore the intelligence apparatus. Just ignore it. Folks, they're trying to take you into a war in Iran the same way they lied and took you into a war in Iraq, based upon lies. That has, I don't think any discussion or analysis about the current circumstance can be held without understanding that reality. Not to mention, Ayatollah Khomeini issued his fatwa prohibiting the development of a nuclear weapons program in Iran because that violates some of the fundamental tenets of the Holy Quran. And they are a theocracy. So when Khomeini says it ain't happening, folks, it ain't happening. Ajamu Baraka.
Well, this is going to be a very short one because everything you said is I'm in agreement with. That basically there was no program. There was no basis for this illegal assault on the sovereignty of another nation. And what people need to ask the question is, why was that assault made then? We know it wasn't about nuclear weapons because there was an agreement between the U.S. and Iran that Donald Trump ripped up in 2018. Okay, it restricted the use of Iran's enrichment program to 3.67, barely enough to pursue their civilian energy program. The real concern that the U.S. has, and the real interest here in play, is domination of the so-called Middle East, or what we call what is really West Asia. And the only state that can block the complete domination of the region by the U.S. is Iran. This is all about hegemony. It's all about what we refer to as imperialist hegemony. It's all about making money for the U.S. And for Israel, okay? Using your tax dollars. And eventually, if they can, using your and our kids, grandkids to fight on behalf of who? The rich, the elite, to control territory and other people. We've got to get hip to this game, okay? These are not your enemies. These are maybe the enemies of the ruling elite. They're not the enemies of the working class people in this country. And it seems like the only ones that finally caught up to that seems to be with the political right, the Trumpians. They're like, we're tired of this because so many of our kids end up going to these never-ending wars, coming back traumatized, injured for life. We've got to get hip to that on the other side, if you will, okay? We got our people disproportionately, talking about Black folks, who disproportionately positioned to the point if there's war, we end up getting screwed up. I was a vet in the military. I know what these contradictions are, okay? Don't let these people use us. And definitely don't let them take our sons and daughters into a Gaza where you have an ongoing genocide, because if they participate in that, they are war criminals also. So look, we got to go back to how we used to be. There used to be a time that Black of these kinds of policies. That didn't change until one thing happened: the ascendancy of power to this war criminal named Barack Hussein Obama. We got to go back to who we really are as Black folks.
Final point, and then we'll let you go, because you mentioned the JCPOA and the 3.67% of uranium enrichment. This is very, you don't have to, folks, you don't have to understand the physics of this. all you really have to do is understand some very simple mathematics. Under the JCPOA, Iran was limited to the percentage of enrichment, plutonium enrichment, to 3.67%. And by all accounts, by all measurements, they were adhering to that agreement. It was Donald Trump that tore up the JCPOA and removed the United States from the agreement, meaning Iran no longer had to abide by that 3.67% limit. So what Iran has done, and Ajamu, if I'm making this up or if I'm wrong, please correct me. Their enrichment now up to 60% has nothing to do with nuclear military ambition. They're trying to demonstrate to the United States, y'all been messing around, and we are now trying to show you what we can do so that you all will stop being stuck on stupid and come back to the agreement. The same way they have demonstrated incredible restraint in the manner in which they have used missiles to respond to Israel for their, as in Netanyahu's words, preemptive strikes on Iran, and the same way the United States has used the MOB, the big 30,000-pound bomb. They're saying, folks, we could take this fight to the street, but we don't want to do that. If y'all would just be rational and reasonable, we could actually work this out. Am I being too romantic about all of this, Ajamu?
No, you're being realistic, and that's what people need to understand. Because sometimes those kind of details don't get disseminated to the folks. That basically after Trump, as you said, tore up the agreement, the Iranians they stuck to it. This was verified by the International Atomic Energy Agency. They continued to net enrich uranium for the next few years. And it wasn't until they realized that once the Biden administration came in, because remember, Biden pretended like he was going to reestablish that agreement, okay? Because he criticized Trump for tearing it up. He campaigned, one of his platforms was to put that back in place because it was seen as such an effective tool to limit Iran. Even elements in Israel understood that to be the case, okay? But what was in play was they're concerned about the ability of Iran to defend itself using its ballistic missile program. So they wanted to bring them back to the table and have them basically surrender their national sovereignty. Iran said, no, you're all confused. Let us show you what we could do if we were really committed to the possibility of building a bomb. And then they enriched up to 60% and held, okay? That was supposed to be leveraged, part of the negotiation process also. But of course, the U.S. used that as an excuse to ratchet up a hysteria in order to lay the foundation for this attack that Israel has been advocating for like more than 20 years. So that's where we are today. Don't let them fool you. Keep on watching these kinds of programs, get the real information, and then make your assessment. And you'll find every time these officials in D.C., Democrat or Republican, are moving their lips, they're usually lying.
Ajamu Baraka, you gave me more time. I know your schedule is tight. Greatly appreciate it. Bless you, my brother. Thank you. Look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it. Okay.
Folks, before I go any further, before we put this to rest for the day, let me take a second chance to welcome the latest folks who joined the Connecting the Dots YouTube family. Big thanks to Cone 620, to Raphael Ellington, Kevin Baptiste, thank you, my brother, Carlos Paleo, and Maddie. Thank you all. You all are officially in the club. No membership card required. And also no tariffs are assigned to your membership. Now, here's the deal, folks. We are getting real close to hitting 8,000 subscribers. I'm talking 50 people short. That's one church van. That's a high school classroom. That's a college classroom, or just a few cousins, aunts, and uncles that have spare Gmail accounts. Please, folks, help us get there. It'll mean more than you know. And if you're watching this show every week, you're learning something, nodding your head, yelling at the screen, but you still haven't hit that subscribe button. What are we waiting for? A personal invitation from me? Well, guess what? I'm giving it to you right now. So please, folks, hit that button, join the conversation, help us get beyond 8,000 so we can then get to 10. Come for the truth, stay for the questions. This is Connecting the Dots, and we're just getting started. With all of that said, folks, look, Monday, what? Oh, peace in the world. Thank you. We got another member. Thank you so much. Peace in the world. Thank you so much. Daniel Lazar is going to join us on Monday. Daniel Lazar is going to join us on Monday. I could go through all the other stuff in closing, but all I can say to you all is thank you to those of you that have sent me the well wishes. I'm still in California. Funeral was yesterday. Beautiful ceremony. We sent my brother out in only the fashion that he deserved. I'm good. I'm cool. It's all good. With that, thank you. See you Monday. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.